Grocer.
Mr. Chairman, I want to take a brief call, really of a political nature, while there are senior Labour Party members in the room, to record my personal appreciation of the very constructive approach that they've taken. And I have, as they would know, from many private conversations I've had with senior members of the Labour Party and the Labour opposition, and also a series of public comments, that I have been assiduous in recognising the huge contribution previous Labour governments have made to the promotion of New Zealand getting a fair deal in the world, and I will not change that position. At the same time, I recognise, because we have a very, very tough chairman here, I will not refer to the elephant in the room, but we realise that we're looking through this debate to a much bigger debate that we'll have, and I've, out of respect for the opposition, I'm taking nothing for granted. I do appreciate that in some corners of the constituencies that you represent, there are reservations of quite a serious nature on aspects that are being debated, in my opinion, often with wild exaggeration, but it's part of the political process. So I'm not making any assumptions here, but I do want to record the government's appreciation for the very constructive position you've taken on this. I won't go over the little argument we're having over whether or not any measure that not this government but a future government might have with respect to residential property would or would not be ruled out. I think there is some ambiguity here between our readings of the agreement that is unlikely to be clarified anytime soon. But that aside, I do want to acknowledge this is not a perfect agreement. I don't imagine New Zealand will ever negotiate a perfect agreement. It's a complete paradox to me that somehow New Zealand has been able to get higher quality agreements negotiating by itself than it has when it's had the ostensible support of much, much more powerful countries. It is simply not explicable by any rational political logic that I've ever understood, but it is a fact. When you look at the high-quality agreement the previous Labour government achieved on China, well, it's not perfect. There's still quotas on wool, and there's a safeguard mechanism that, had we been able to see, or the negotiators and the ministers of the day, Mr. Sutton and Mr. Goff, been able to see with perfect clarity, maybe we would have got a slightly different deal. But nevertheless, the China deal is an excellent quality deal. And again, in a very unique set of circumstances, the comparable arrangement that our representatives, I'm choosing my words with great diplomatic care, were able to negotiate with Taiwan is, again, an extraordinarily high-quality agreement. And yet in both cases, we have tiny New Zealand doing it by itself up front, ahead of the pack. And it is a very interesting political thing to reflect on why we got still a good agreement. There's no doubt in my mind that this is a good agreement, but it is not of the same pristine quality as the China and the Taiwan deals were. And the reason is because we were following in the political wake of very large countries, which for a set of reasons it's probably not sensible to speculate in public, seem to have a somewhat different and less rigorous approach to these negotiations. So there we are. I think this agreement will hold us in very good stead. But I do want to emphasise one aspect of agreements of which this is one. The happiest people in New Zealand, when finally, after 5 years of literally tortured negotiations at every level, prime ministerial level with the presidents, 2 or 3 of them, ministerial and senior officials who are absolutely world-class negotiators, when finally we got this over the line, I was always conscious that the happiest people in New Zealand were the kiwi fruit producers. And I think it deserves, as I reach the 6 o'clock deadline, just a second reflection on why. Because it does have a broader application, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be very careful to watch your admonitions. And that is, it's not only just a question of new opportunities which this country will need for the generations that will succeed us, but it's also about protecting existing trades. And there is no doubt that had we not finally managed to break this impasse and get this agreement through on kiwi fruit, I forget exactly how important a market kiwi fruit is, but it's a very important market for New Zealand kiwi fruit, they would have been thrown out of that market. They were under massive pressure. So the one thing I'd ask members of the House to recall when they sit down and look at this agreement or future agreements is you have to consider the costs of staying outside. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.